I'm Isabelle Gonthier, Chief Assessment Officer at PSI Services, and I invite you to delve deep into the world of testing with me. Every episode, I'll be on the virtual couch with experts from the testing industry, engaging in conversations about the latest developments in our field. Your quest for testing knowledge starts here. Well, welcome to the Tried and Tested podcast. I have the pleasure here to be in Washington, D.C. with Jared Zurn. Jared is the Senior Vice President of Programs at the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards, more commonly known as NCARB. Easier to say, NCARB.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So we're here in the NCARB offices, and I'm extremely happy to be here with you and to have a conversation about modernizing programs, because NCARB has done a lot of that, and you're an innovator, modernizer. So I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, welcome. Always start with the same question because there's a lot of great things we learn about our guests when we ask them, like, what's your journey? How did you get into credentialing? What's your story?
Sure. My journey into credentialing isn't uncommon because I am a subject matter expert, as we like to call them. Yeah. So I am someone who was a practicing architect. And I was actually teaching at a community college in the architectural technology program when one day I literally got a flyer in the mail. That's when people used to mail out job postings. Remember those good old days?
Yeah, kind of dating you a
I'm
little bit.
dating myself, yes. Yeah. Hopefully the filter is turned on so I look 20 years younger. But the reality is I received a flyer in the mail from this organization called NCARB, mm-hmm. and they were looking to hire somebody to come work in their test development world. And what they announced in the job interview was sort of they wanted somebody who understood technology, somebody who obviously understood architecture, but somebody who wanted to get into the testing world. Well, my background in education, myself being an architect, and honestly being a little bit of a technology nerd, was sort of this perfect alignment. And so I applied for the position very quickly. Actually, they flew me out to Washington, D.C. because I was living back in Minnesota at the time. Okay. Went through the interview process and then ended up, being offered the position, and I took it. So moved the family, packed up, moved from Minnesota out to the Washington, D.C. area to work for NCARB, and I have been here ever since, and it's been almost 17 years.
Wow, amazing. It's a little bit like a unicorn that they were looking for in terms of that combination of skills.
Yeah, what they told me is that they had actually been looking to fill this position for over a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then I don't know. I guess I'm a unicorn.
Yeah, hence my comment.
At the time.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, that's great because it's interesting again because you think about the combination of that skill set that got you like that entry point into NCARB, and then from there you kind of grew up with the organization and credentialing, and all aspects of it.
Right, because when I started, I was really just in that. I was in test development, but at sort of the base level.
Okay.
And there was a lot of technology implementation. And then over time, sort of grew my knowledge of the test development psychometric mm-hmm. world, right? Expanded on that. And now, yes, survey different role where I'm overseeing more aspects of all programs related to licensure at NCARB.
Yeah, well, this is great. I think what's going to be interesting as I said in the opening, what's going to be really interesting as part of this conversation is leverage your experience, obviously, with NCARB, but in credentialing as well, and really talk through some of the things that you've been working on mm-hmm. Within the organization and how you're sort of helping shake things up a little
Sure.
bit, if I can put it that way, which is something that I have to say really, really admire about you. You're someone that kind of has a lot of energy, thinking about things differently while still, preserving the integrity of the process and everything that kind of goes with an assessment program, but really challenging sometimes the status quo, which in our industry is not always prevalent. Let's put it that way.
Psychometricians don't like to be challenged a lot in crazy new ways of thinking about stuff.
I know. So it's always good to kind of have a mix of people that can sort of work together in pushing those limits. So I guess modernizing is an important aspect of staying relevant. Mm-hmm. It's about staying relevant. And NCARB has this vision of always kind of looking at ways of staying relevant, thinking about things differently, and making some changes. So talk to me a little bit more about that and what it looks like for you and NCARB.
Sure. I think for us, when you look at it, I think there's a lot of us in the testing industry do the same thing, which is we're always sort of paying attention to the job, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what's the job we're certifying, or what's the job we're trying to, make sure people are qualified to hold a license in. And so we all do that, right? So we do our, practice analysis or job task analysis refresh. And sometimes those don't lead to dramatic change on the program. You're like, it's kind of the same old thing. We're doing the same old thing. I think at NCARB, there's been two factors that have caused us to be more innovative. One, the profession of architecture is changing a lot. Technology really has rippled through the industry. In the 16 plus years that I have been here, when I started, most architects were using CAD, but basically they were just replicating the old drafting methodology. They were just doing it on the computer. So you're drawing digital lines instead of pencil lines. Now architecture is completely different. Now architecture truly is three-dimensional modeling. They call it building information modeling. It is not about lines on paper anymore. It is really about how can you create this digital twin, in essence, of the building that's eventually going to get built. So that's caused architecture to become so much more collaborative, so much more technical, and there are so many other specialties plugged into the profession. So the architect is really a different creature today than they were 15 years ago. So that's part of what has pushed us to we have to think differently. At the same time, NCARB is willing to challenge some of the orthodoxies around, to be an architect, you must go get this accredited degree that's going to take at least 5 years. And we challenge the orthodoxy about, really, you have to go and do this much experience. Part of the reason we challenge those are because we're willing to call BS, if I can say that, on some of the stuff we talk about in the industry, which is this person worked for 2 years, so that demonstrates a level of competence. And I will tell you, no, that means for 2 years they didn't get fired. Right? And we all know it. If we're honest with each other, we say it's just a proxy. Not getting fired is a proxy for some level of competency.
But
it's really questionable. You're looking at it. Is that really it? Because maybe you didn't get fired because, I don't know, you're the son of somebody's nephew and that. They're not, right? And so we're challenging those things too about going, is this program really delivering a quality individual, or is this a proxy measurement that really isn't providing a lot of value? So that's the second thing that's causing us to really get out there. The third thing is we really have stepped back and taken a look at sort of equity and fairness in our licensure process. And yes, I am sitting in front of you as pretty much the poster child for what architects looked like for quite some time, right? Let's be honest. I am somebody who had the privilege of being able to go to a 5-year, NAB accredited program, which today is going to cost a whole bunch of money, right? I'm a white male. I know that that's actually the vast majority of people in the profession. And so we've been looking at our programs to ask, is there something about what we're requiring for licensure that's getting in the way, but not getting in the way it should? Because we all know that too. Every credentialing body and every licensing organization is going to say, some people shouldn't be license holders.
And absolutely. That's you need to make sure you have the right people with the right skill sets and competencies.
But then looking at what are some of those maybe impediments that have been put in place that aren't really about their competency, but they're actually really some other factor. And we've all heard it, that's what I had to do to get licensed, so you should too. But and again, we're willing to challenge that.
Which I think it's really important and great when you think of it, because it's thinking about it differently, looking at removing some barriers and providing more access.
Right. And being really honest about what does it mean to be just licensed, right? We throw the term around a lot, the minimally qualified individual or minimally competent individual, and we challenge ourselves, but really? We're really push hard on trying to get down to minimal competency so it doesn't look like we're trying to keep people out of the profession. We want everybody to be in the profession that is truly competent, but that means setting the bar at the right height.
Exactly. Establishing what the standard is and providing the opportunity for people to show whether they meet that standard or not. And now a short break. Hello, tried and tested listeners and fellow testing enthusiasts. I'm Isabelle Gonthier, your guide through the fascinating world of credentialing. Each week, we dive deep with expert guests to explore the hottest topics in certification and licensure testing. If you're enjoying our journey through lifelong learning and innovation, take a moment to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you know someone passionate about testing or curious about the latest testing trends, why not share this podcast with them? It might just be the inspiration they need. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our community. Remember, sharing knowledge is one of the best ways to grow our industry together. Keep listening. You talk about the evolution of the profession, and what does that mean in terms of the assessment itself, what it looks like, how it's structured, and what it's assessing?
It means we have redone it multiple times.
Okay, fair enough.
That's the other true story of my time at NCARB, is that when I started at NCARB, it was an interesting time because we were actually transitioning from what we called version 3 to version 4. And so my first experience at NCARB was like being involved in watching a transition occur and seeing all the things that didn't go well, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes transitioning from one version is messy, but we were doing it because the profession had changed enough.
Yeah.
Well, then I stuck around NCARB long enough where it got to the point where it's like, wait, now I'm responsible for the next transition. So we transitioned from version 4 to version 5 back in the 2015 timeframe.
Okay.
So you take all the things you learned previously, you apply it to the new transition. But the reason we changed is because, again, the profession had changed. And whereas everybody used to say, well, architects need to be able to draw floor plans and design and sketch and do all of this kind of stuff, by 2015, we really started to say, do they? Mm-hmm. Does an architect really need to be able to draw? Should you expect me right now to pull out a notepad and sketch you a new entry sequence to your home?
Yeah, probably not.
Right? Well, the reality is I hopefully could. I hopefully could.
Hopefully.
I'm going to hopefully do it.
But you can leverage technology. We talked about technology.
I can leverage technology to do it. And at the same time, this is a really interesting question I would suggest all listeners ask your subject matter experts. So my challenge to people when I said, do you really need to draw? And they say, absolutely, I'm an architect. I have to draw. I said, okay, let's say, unfortunately, on the way home tonight, you get in an accident and you lose use of both of your arms. You become partially paralyzed. Should I come take away your license to practice architecture? And of course, they're like, whoa.
What do you mean?
No, you don't get to take away my license to practice architecture just because I can't use my arms. And I'm like, but you just told me I need to be able to draw to be an architect, and you can't draw anymore. And so it forced people to actually go, no, architecture is actually the decision making. Mm-hmm. And so that is part of what is forcing us to then rethink our program, because NCARB used to have a graphic software where people would go into the test center, they would move spaces around on the screen, they would do a layout. But the reality is moving the pieces around on the screen isn't what mattered. What mattered were the decisions they were making about where to place this piece next to that piece. And so that's what we've really done, is we've challenged ourselves to say, is it really a profession of doing, or is this a profession of judgment?
Yeah, so really thinking in a critical way about what are those core competencies, what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required to be an architect, to be a competent architect, and rethinking
absolutely,
the foundational pieces.
And we're all probably doing it today. When you look at something like artificial intelligence, so in architecture, it's called generative design. There has been generative design software out there for the past 5 or 6 years. Right now, a lot of people don't know about it, especially if you're outside of the profession. If you're in the profession, you do, because you literally can tell the computer, go generate 1,000 different solutions for your entry sequence to your home. And the computer is going to just start spitting them out.
Wow.
Okay, architect's not doing the drawing anymore, but what does the architect have to do? Look at those options and say, this is actually the better option for you. Or maybe these 3 are the ones you should really consider.
Based on the structural, based on all of the other factors. And it's not about the drawing anymore, but it's about the combination of requirements and factors to be assessed.
It's the judgment and decision-making that go into it.
Yeah, which I think is really important, because again, it speaks to that evolution of the profession, of what is required on the job, and really elevate it to what it is truly what needs to be done. So.
Yeah, I mean, and we can even, I will take this because I know, I have friends in the industry who also work like roofing certification. Great example. Okay, do you expect the roofer to be able to carry the shingles up onto the roof of the building they're going to shingle? Probably not, but somebody would say, of course you do. I'm a roofer. I carry. Do you? Or is it perfectly okay that the shingles are sitting there, but you need to know how to properly install them? What matters is you know how to properly install them, not all of the other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. All of the other stuff is there and it kind of like might be needed or not, but what's critical
What's
for the
critical?
competence of
Yep.
on the job. No, this is great. So I think when when you think about the evolution of the, of the job, of the requirements, of the assessment program, how you define what needs to be assessed and all of that. How do you go about making those changes when you think about who you are involving, who you're
Mhm.
engaging? Because you need the involvement, the buy-in,
Yep.
and so yeah, talk to me about that process and engagement.
So this is where I actually get really jealous of people who are in the like specialty certification world.
Hmm.
Because if you are someone who works on a specialty certification, you have so much more power and control than someone who works in the licensure world like myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because NCARB doesn't grant licenses to practice architecture, as you know,
Hmm.
it's the jurisdictional licensing boards. It's a
Yeah,
state government that
yeah,
says, hey, Jared, here's your license to practice architecture. So our challenge at NCARB is when we start to see opportunities for change, what we have to do is really start communicating with 55, in our case, 55 different licensing boards and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Give us your feedback. Okay, we've gotten your feedback. Now we're thinking this way. What do you think of that? And then give us more feedback. And so our process always seems to move slower,
mm,
and that's okay, because if we don't move slow, what happens is we lose
yeah,
35 of the 55 members. They're going to be like, I don't understand what's going on.
yeah.
And as we know, when people don't understand, they tend to say no.
Hmm.
So instead, to get them to yes, we do very deliberative, overly communicative processes to build buy in all along the way.
Yeah. No, and I think that's an important element as well in terms of that kind of consultative approach, all of the steps in the process, because you said it. If you don't, people are going to be left behind. They're going to feel like the train is leaving the station. They're not on board, and they're going to be like, okay, fine, I'm just going to go do my own thing,
Yeah,
which would be disastrous when you think about it from a global, national, global aspects
right.
of the equation. So, um, when you think about some of the changes you've made and how you had to sell it, what would you say was the biggest challenge, but also the biggest opportunity that it created down the road?
Well, I think with every change, one challenge we always have is but that's not the way I did it.
Hmm.
Right. And
Hmm.
so this is where I will admit, I think having been the subject matter expert does give me a little more credibility when I stand in front of other architects and say, I know that's not the way you did it. It's not the way I did it either. Because so I went through the process, but I went through the process in the 90s, right? Other people went through the process even before I did. And I feel like your process was different than mine.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
process was different than these people. And this future process is going to be different than all of ours, but let's talk about how it's worked along the way. And so that's, I think, a big part of the selling is overcoming this. Well, that's not the way I did it. So you need to be
hmm,
ready. Anybody who's going to sell a change, you have to get ready to overcome that static inertia that
yeah,
exists
yeah,
first. Then it's also helping people see what's the benefit on the back
mm,
end,
yeah,
right? So it's always back to the why. Why are you doing this? Why? Because people are always going to complain about some of the granular what of a new program, but if you can't get them to believe in the why, you're never going to get them there. So
hmm.
it's kind of like the Simon Sinek
Yes,
talks
yes,
about
yes. Start with the why.
start with the why.
Hmm.
Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Like, these are the goals of the project, and it's like, why? And then eventually you show what you're doing and how you're going to do it,
Hmm.
achieving those goals. That's how you're going to get the buy-in.
Absolutely. And kind of being able to illustrate the risks and benefits, like
Mhm.
weighing the options
Oh
and
yeah.
understanding, because we talked about earlier in the conversation, we talked about relevance.
Yeah.
And, things are moving fast. And programs like yours, has to stay relevant. When you think about licensure, even like, with things moving slowly, you need to be able to defend to your constituent, to the people the public that you're serving. Safety is critical, competency is critical. So you need to be able to demonstrate the relevancies and how you're keeping up with all of the rapid
Yeah.
changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So from a technology, and the technology, I think, is what I find it's interesting, because looking at different programs from the credentialing standpoint, assessment program, it's impacting professions differently. And what you've just said earlier around the massive impact it has on the way people perform their job and the way it evolved in terms of that critical thinking, decision making, judgment, just elevates it to just the next level.
And maybe the challenge in architecture, as I know in some professions, is it's always been a very broad profession. But what's happening is the world's becoming more and more specialized.
Yeah.
So the sole practitioner architect who does everything from beginning to end on a project, yes, those people still exist. But those people are becoming less and less common because really what's happening is, well, I'm good at this. I know this consultant's good at that. I'm just going to, you're going to let you do this part. I'll do this part. And then it's bringing it all together.
Yeah. So when you think about making some changes and some that might be a bit disruptive, what would be sort of key pieces of advice you would give to other programs that might consider making changes, but they're kind of concerned about how their stakeholders will react? And I understand, there's differences in terms of your world with the licensing boards and all of that, but what pieces of advice would you give?
Sure. I guess my key pieces of advice, if you want to make very, dramatic or innovative change, one is to actually you have to have the plan laid out in your head about how you're going to build and sell all along the way. It's not build it and then sell it. Terrible approach. Like you're destined for failure. So it really is do this part first, get people to buy into this part, know where you're going second, but only share that with a select group. Like you don't need to tell everybody the full master plan. Admittedly, people always think I have some grand master plan. I usually do have a grand master plan.
Of course you do.
Because you need to have that. And so in this latest evolution we're going through right now, we're actively working on really changing the licensure process. We started on it in 2021. It's now 2025, and I'm talking to people about launching it in 2028.
Yeah.
So you have to have that long-term vision where you build stakeholder support every step of the way. So by the time we get to 28, everybody's going to look back and be like, well, yeah, this makes perfect sense. And I'm like, but it makes perfect sense now because we've spent 7 years getting there through all of these little steps along the way.
Yeah, it's part of the evolution, the vision, the longer term vision. So you're not being reactive, you're kind of planning ahead and adjusting. I'm sure there's been adjustments through the process of, where you're going, what the ultimate objective is. Things happen. Again, the way the technology is being evolving, some of these are unpredictable.
Oh, yeah.
So
And acknowledging that even as you lay out the plan and it's to say, here's what we're going to get done in 2024 and 2025. And then we're going to check in and reassess. And we might go a slightly different direction in 25, 26 based on what we've learned. Because again, I think if you say that to people, everybody knows that's the truth. So if you stand in front of somebody and say, here's my 10-year plan of everything that's going to happen, they're like, well, that's not going to happen. Right. So instead, what you say is, here's where we want to get to in 10 years. Here's what we're going to get done in the next year and next year and a half. And then we're going to check back in with everybody. And again, you could take that 10-year time frame and you could squish it into a 10-month time frame. You could use this same process if you're doing rapid development, but it's the same process. Tell people you're going to do something in 10 months, but be honest and say, but we're checking in 2.
Exactly. Defining it into little bite size to make it more digestible in a way. And then so people can consume it, get their head wrapped around it and sort of move forward with the idea. We've talked about how to work with stakeholders and the people and engage. Looking at it from an internal standpoint, how do you keep up with the team here at NCARB? Because I can absolutely see it where, you're moving, like you have big visions, big ideas, want to move things along. And how do you get people on board with that vision and really being part of it? I'm sure I'm looking at the people working at NCARB and, the team that you have is an amazing team because they're keeping up with a lot of different changes, innovations and all that. But how do you, from a leadership standpoint, sort of get them engaged, get them on board and see the vision?
Yeah. So first, I would say you actually have to acknowledge they have regular work because that's an important thing for them. Like everybody at NCARB has regular work they're getting done on today's licensure process. Like the current experience program doesn't go away because we're talking about building a new approach, and the current exam doesn't go away. We still have to write items and do pre-testing. And so the first thing is to acknowledge, I know all of you have all of this other stuff we're doing. Then kind of what we've done is we said, okay, but let's actually build a cross-collaborative team. Because what it can't be is, oh, the exam guys over there coming up, right? That's bad, because then it creates an us-them relationship. So really, it's also being established a cross-collaborative team. Every department inside of this organization gets together on a regular basis and says, how's this project impacting me? What if we do this next? How does that impact me? How does it impact my daily work? But then what does that mean for my next 6 months and my next 12 months? So that's the other part. So we're all headed in this together. That's a big part of it. And then there's also the constant check-ins. I mean, so excellent timing. You are here in town today, but tomorrow we actually have an all-staff meeting.
Oh, okay.
All of NCARB staff are going to be in one place 3 blocks away from here, because we do not all fit in our office in a single meeting space. But we're going to come together. And part of it is to just talk about a big chunk of the agenda is, let's just talk about this, what we're calling Pathways to Practice project. Where are we at today? What are we planning on doing in the short term? Are we on track? So we're really updating everybody in the organization.
Yeah, which is, it's amazing, because again, that's all part of that communication that is critical externally, internally, all around. So, like we've discussed, it's interesting to see all of the evolution, what's been happening within the program with NCARB, the whole process of engaging across the board, like we talked about internal, external engagement and all of that. As you think about all the changes, you were talking about the staff the all staff meeting, town hall that you're going to have. So to really talk about the pathways, what's next? What are you thinking about? What are you like? What other types of innovation are you considering at this moment in time? And how are you going to get your people excited for the future?
We're considering a lot, but let's be honest, we're not going to make a bunch of changes right away. This Pathways project's a really big deal for us, because it really is changing the licensure process.
Okay.
So the reality is, inside of NCARB for the next 3 to 4 years, this is it. Like, this is the thing we are going to get done, because we're in essence changing a huge percentage of the work that this organization does. So from a licensure process perspective, it's about 30 to 40% of all things NCARB. So we're making that massive of a shift inside of the organization. So beyond the next 3 to 5 years, do we have plans? Maybe. Well, of course we have plans for beyond the next 3 to 5 years. Where we're looking is, what we're looking at is really the world of the continuing competency, continuing education. Architecture today exists in a very standard model of, so many hours of continuing ed completed every year. And we kind of all know that's a joke too. Again, back to my earlier statement about, are we willing to call BS on something? Yeah, we are, because 12 hours of continuing education in courses that I self-select, maybe on December 31st to get done, probably does not actually demonstrate I'm truly maintaining a broad level of competency across all of architecture. And so that's really our next big focus. And we are already hinting at this. So if somebody who is not in the credentialing world gets a hold of this podcast and wants to spy on what NCARB is doing, it's not a secret. We're already telling people that, yes, our 2 to 3 year timeline is all about the licensure programs. After that, we are going to engage in greater conversations about continuing competence.
Yeah, I think it's great. And in a way, hearing you say that, there's a lot already on the table. There's a lot to do. There's a lot. It's having a huge impact in terms of what the assessment program looks like and everything. So you need to give yourself a minute, in a way, to be able to really truly implement, assess, review, and think about the effects that it's going to have on other aspects of the program.
I mean, and back to the leadership question, right? A good leader also knows when to say that's enough. Because we've maybe all had bosses in the past who come in and are like, okay, we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I need you to get 7, 8, 9, and 10 done. And we're all like, well, that's not going to happen. Like, it's just not, it's not going to happen. Or if it does happen, they're all going to be bad ideas, right? So instead, get real about what you can really get done. Focus on that, get it done, and then go on to the next big thing.
It's not change for the sake of change. It's really purposeful.
Yeah, and it is strategic. It has to be strategic where we headed as an organization, right? We know the new licensure programs will reposition NCARB to have a different relationship with the stakeholder that we have, both member board members that are out there granting licenses at the state level, but also the candidate as a stakeholder. You can't switch to a competency framework, which is what we're doing, and hopefully building, our concept is to build multiple assessment approaches to give people choice. That means it's not telling every candidate to do everything the same way. It's about coaching the candidate to navigating the process in a way that's best for them. That means we will change fundamentally in how we engage with our customer base.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest change that you see when you think about the programs of the program of today and what you're working towards? What's kind of the biggest change?
Yes, massive change. And it's a philosophical change.
Okay.
When I started at NCARB, again, I came to NCARB being both an instructor from a community college and an architect. And as I heard conversations about the role of licensure and all of that kind of stuff, I would ask the question about, dare I would use the word help. Well, how are we going to help people, right? And it was like, we don't help. The answer was, we don't help people at NCARB. It's like, what? Like, what do we do then? And they're like, oh, well, we developed this, we developed a test and they have to take it, but we're not here to help them. They have to just take the test and pass it. And then that's how they're going to get their license. And I was like, okay. Right. And a part of it is like, I just moved my whole family from Minnesota. I'm not going to be like, well, that's crazy talk. I quit. Right. Because I was not in a place to do that. So part of it is like, you just listen and try to figure out like, where's the logic? And there is a point where, yes, we can't give away the answers to the test.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
The psychometrician in you is like, oh my God. Right. No, we're never going to give away the answers to a test. We're never going to say, well, it doesn't really matter what you put down as far as documenting experience, just lie, we don't care. We're never going to say that because we do care.
Yeah.
But can we do a better job of helping you, the candidate, navigate the exam?
Yeah.
Can we be telling you strategies? And maybe it's not, I can't tell you test taking strategies. I took the test in the 90s. My test taking strategies really don't apply anymore. It's a different test. So can we facilitate other candidates telling you, candidate in the middle of it, better test taking strategies that might work for you? Yes, we can.
Yeah.
So can we help? Yeah, we can help. And that's been the biggest shift, honestly, from 15 years ago to the we don't help, literally no, to, oh yeah, like there should be no secrets. We can explain everything and we can help candidates understand it, navigate the process, and be successful. But in the end, you're still not going to get done with the programs if you're not competent.
Absolutely. You can maintain the rigor of the entirety of the program while still making sure the test-taking experience is optimal and you support the candidates through the process. There's nothing against that.
Right.
So yeah, I think I agree with you. I think that, from your journey with NCARB, but I think in general, also in the credentialing and licensing industry, it's more and more prevalent. Is kind of thinking about it a lot, that way.
And I would agree across the industry over the last 5 years, more people are talking about like whether you want to say support or help or whatever the word is, we all know we are sitting in a position of authority. We are. We're in organizations that grant a credential or run programs that eventually lead to granting of a license. We're in a position of authority. So we have to take that authority and be responsible with it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean hide behind a curtain, not give people answers and say, well, if you want to be a licensed architect, just, as they would say, suck it up, buttercup, and get through the process, right? That's not an acceptable answer.
Yeah, no, there's not this whole concept of a big black box, of unknowns and all of that, and say, we know best, you do this. That doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work. So it's great to provide a little bit more visibility, understanding, exposure, and support. So, yeah.
And then be willing to answer the why question, because I get those questions all the time. Why did you do this? Why did NCARB make that decision? Why did NCARB make that decision? And I'll answer the question. I will give you the reason why. You may not agree with it. I understand that, but I'm also not going to hide it from you. And it's never going to be just because.
Yeah, absolutely. What's been the most rewarding through all of this?
So on a personal level, admittedly, I think the most rewarding, when I look back at all of my time at NCARB, what I really reflect on is how it has broadened my perspective And I would say, honestly, the perspective of my family.
Mm-hmm.
So I said I was from northern Minnesota. I was not from Minneapolis, St. Paul. When I tell people I'm from Minnesota, everybody's like, oh, you're from Minneapolis, St. Paul. No, I am not from the giant city on the southern part of the state. I am from a town that had 8,000 people in it.
Wow.
That's where I was teaching. I was at a small town, and my world was northern Minnesota, eastern North Dakota, and that was kind of it, all the way down to, and I had some family living in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. That was it. That was my bubble. And then I came to NCARB and had the opportunity to really, my bubble went from that to all of the United States immediately, like, boop, instantly.
Yeah, just a huge expansion.
And so over the last 15 years, I've had that opportunity to get to know architects from all across the country, all of our different jurisdictions, that, and just get exposed to it. And that in itself has been the most rewarding for me, because now, if you rattle off someplace in this country, I'm like, oh yeah, I've either been there, I've been someplace close to there, I know people from that area, and I can tell when I go back and visit still some of my brothers and sisters living back in Minnesota who stayed in that small bubble. They're like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, next week I'm in California, and then a couple of weeks from now I'm gonna be over here, and I can just see they're just like, I don't know, it doesn't comprehend. Whereas I'm like, oh yeah, but that's what I want. Like I want to go to Florida and find out what's going on.
Yeah.
And I want to go to New York and find out what's going on. And the difference between, upstate New York and New York City, those are two different worlds. And I have experienced both of them because of NCARB.
Yeah, no, this is great. This is great to hear. So as we sort of wrap up this amazing conversation, I should say, what would you say, like, what are your final thoughts? If you think about what you want the audience to really own into in terms of, final thoughts.
Yeah, I guess, if I'm espousing wisdom, which is always scary, like, don't ask me to do that.
Go for it.
I think it really is, like, don't be afraid to ask yourself the hard questions.
Yeah.
Right? We all do stuff because we've always done stuff. And give yourself time to just say, what if, or why am I doing that? Because let's be honest too, our candidates ask us questions, and sometimes we're going, oh yeah, that's an easy question, because what you're not asking me is the hard question. The hard question is the one I know I would have a hard time answering. Yeah. And so then that's where I internally challenge myself. And honestly, work with a great team, which is the other benefit, is you'd be amazed how many times we just sit in meetings and talk about stuff and brainstorm ideas and like that, because if we challenge ourselves inside the safety of a meeting room inside of NCARB, that's the best place to do it, because we can start to find out where we really don't have good answers. And that's the next thread you pull on.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, why? Well, we can't really, why are we doing it that way? What else could we be doing? How could this be better?
Yeah.
So I guess that's my advice, is be willing to ask yourself the hard questions, or get into a safe group and have everybody ask you hard questions.
Yeah. And take the time.
Take the time to do it.
Absolutely.
Yes. And then you're going to ask yourself hard questions and come up with great ideas. And then you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's going to take 10 years to get done. You're going to be like, and that's okay.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. Because the other part of this whole wisdom thing is, it's never about what you're doing. It's about how you're leaving the organization. And so, yes, I truly have that steward mindset, which is like, I am not going to be at NCARB forever. Trust me, people, if I'm on a podcast with Isabelle in 10 years, call me up and say, Jared, you have lost it. You need to, like, I am not going to be doing this 10 years from now. So I know my responsibility is actually setting this organization up for it to be successful and for nobody to remember my name. And that's what I want to accomplish.
Yeah, this is amazing. It's bigger than you, and the organization and the profession is going to be better for it.
Yep.
Well, Jared, always extremely insightful. Thank you so much for your time, and probably not going to be on a podcast in 10 years from now.
Exactly.
Maybe in a year or two. Who knows?
I'll give you a year or two.
Okay.
I'm not giving you 10.
Perfect. Duly noted.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks.